A disconnect is not required to be within sight of the motor when the motor is located within 10 feet of the disconnecting means. This is an exception to the general rule that requires motor disconnects to be readily accessible and within sight of the equipment they serve. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides specific guidelines for the placement and requirements of disconnecting means for motors to ensure safety during maintenance and repair. Generally, a disconnecting means must be installed within sight of the motor controls. This requirement ensures that anyone working on the motor can visibly verify that the power is disconnected, preventing accidental startup and potential injury. However, there are exceptions to this rule, and one key exception is when the motor and the disconnecting means are located very close to each other. The 10-foot rule is designed to accommodate situations where strict adherence to the line of sight requirement would be impractical or unnecessary. This can occur in compact machinery, close quarters, or specialized equipment where the motor and its disconnect are necessarily situated in proximity. The rationale behind this exception is that if the motor and disconnect are so close, the person operating the disconnect has a clear and immediate awareness of the motor's status. The potential for confusion or accidental re-energization is significantly reduced because the motor is essentially within arm's reach of the disconnect. It is crucial to understand that this exception is not a blanket waiver of the in-sight requirement. It applies only when the distance between the motor and the disconnecting means is no more than 10 feet. If the distance exceeds 10 feet, the general rule requiring an in-sight disconnect applies. Furthermore, even when the 10-foot rule is met, other requirements for disconnects must still be followed. For example, the disconnect must be readily accessible, meaning it cannot be obstructed or require the use of tools to access. It must also be properly rated for the voltage and current requirements of the motor it serves. The disconnect must also clearly indicate whether it is in the open or closed position. Proper labeling is also essential. The disconnecting means must be clearly labeled to indicate which motor it controls. This is particularly important in situations where multiple motors and disconnects are located in the same area. Clear labeling prevents confusion and ensures that the correct disconnect is used for the intended motor. Additionally, the type of disconnect used must be appropriate for the application. Disconnects can range from simple manual switches to more complex devices such as motor starters with disconnect capabilities. The choice of disconnect depends on factors such as the motor's horsepower, voltage, and control requirements. For small motors, a simple horsepower-rated switch may suffice. For larger motors, a motor starter with overload protection and a disconnect function is typically required. Understanding the specific requirements for motor disconnects is essential for electrical safety. Incorrectly installed or improperly sized disconnects can create hazardous conditions and increase the risk of electrical shock, fire, and equipment damage. Therefore, it is important to consult the NEC and other relevant standards when designing and installing motor control circuits. In addition to the in-sight rule and the 10-foot exception, there are other considerations that may affect the placement and type of disconnect required. For example, if the motor is located in a hazardous location, such as an area where flammable gases or vapors are present, a special disconnect that is rated for use in hazardous locations must be used. These disconnects are designed to prevent sparks or other ignition sources from causing an explosion. Similarly, if the motor is part of a critical system, such as a fire pump or emergency generator, additional requirements may apply to ensure the reliability of the disconnecting means. These requirements may include the use of redundant disconnects or automatic transfer switches that can switch to an alternate power source in the event of a power failure. When working with motor disconnects, it is important to follow safe work practices and wear appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE. This includes wearing safety glasses, gloves, and insulated tools. Always verify that the power is disconnected before working on any electrical equipment. Use a voltage tester to confirm that the circuit is de-energized and follow lockout/tagout procedures to prevent accidental re-energization. Furthermore, it is crucial to be aware of the potential hazards associated with motors and motor control circuits. Motors can generate high voltages and currents, and they can also produce mechanical hazards such as rotating shafts and moving parts. Therefore, it is important to exercise caution when working around motors and to follow all safety guidelines and procedures. In summary, the general rule for motor disconnects requires them to be within sight of the motor they control. However, an exception exists when the motor is located within 10 feet of the disconnecting means. Even when this exception applies, other requirements for disconnects must still be met, including accessibility, proper rating, clear labeling, and appropriate type. Understanding these requirements is essential for electrical safety and compliance with the NEC. Always consult the latest edition of the NEC and other relevant standards for specific requirements and guidelines. When installing or maintaining motor disconnects, follow safe work practices and wear appropriate PPE. Verify that the power is disconnected before working on any electrical equipment and follow lockout/tagout procedures to prevent accidental re-energization. Remember that electrical work can be dangerous, and it is important to be properly trained and qualified before working on electrical systems. If you are not qualified, seek the assistance of a licensed electrician.